Welcome to the AFR Saints channel, where we provide you daily content on your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to leave your comments below and smash that like button. Who dat? We are 9 days away from the NFL draft, from round one. I love the draft. I'm a draft junkie. It hurts my soul that our guy Mike Detillier isn't with us anymore. Well, let me rephrase. Let me rephrase. Mike Detillier is not with us on the show anymore. Okay, Mike Detillier, very much alive, very much doing well. But of course, Mike, was, for 11 years, every Thursday, Mike was on the show for a full hour, and of course, the M&D draft report that Mike pumped out for more than 20 years was a staple for me. Once I had the M&D draft report for the first time, I never watched a draft again without it. I love the draft. I love the thought of the diamond in the rough. I love the thought of changing your franchise with one pick like the Bengals did with Joe Burrow. I love the idea of a round 3 trade that nets you Alvin Kamara, right? I just love the draft. So a week from Thursday, our 104.5 ESPN draft party is over at Don Juan Cigar Bar, presented by Rouse's. We'll be at Don Juan Cigar Bar. Hopefully you come join us for round 1 of the draft. If you can't be there, no worries. You can watch us on the Watch 104.5 ESPN YouTube channel. And we've talked so much about the draft. And sometimes when you get closer to the draft, what you start to see are Vegas odds moving. And it's because when you get this close to the draft, there's just enough out there. Like right now, Bryce Young is, I think, minus 1,200 or something like that to be the number 1 overall pick. Bryce Young is going to be the number 1 overall pick. And I can kind of kick myself in the tail for not making a bet on that about 6 weeks ago when I was told by someone at the Combine that C.J. Stroud's people were told Bryce Young was going to be the number 1 pick. But my point is, when you get closer to the draft and there's a larger sample size of Combine, pro days, one-on-one meetings, team visits, right? Each team can host 30 prospects on visits, on pre-draft visits. You start to learn, because it's not just teams, and front office executives, but agents of all the players themselves, coaches, that all have people they talk to. And when all these different people start saying the same thing, that's how you start to sort of crystallize where the truths are and what's the smoke and mirrors, right? What's the gamesmanship being played? And so whenever you get this close to the draft, a lot of times mock drafts will tell you, like, everybody mock draft right now has Bryce Young going number 1 overall, because everybody knows Bryce Young is going number 1 to Carolina. The bigger question right now, if you haven't noticed, but Will Levis's odds to be the number 2 pick have skyrocketed, because apparently Houston loves Bryce Young, maybe not as in love with C.J. Stroud. So if Young goes number 1, does Houston trade back, or do they take Will Levis? It's an interesting question that could transpire on draft night. We'll find all that out as the draft comes and goes. But as it pertains to the Saints, what is crystallizing right now is, barring an unimaginable value at 29, the Saints are going to take a defensive tackle or a defensive lineman. Today, Mel Kiper and Todd McShay did a mock draft for the first 3 rounds where they alternated picks, right? So Kiper picked number 1, McShay picked 2, Kiper 3, McShay 4. You get it. And they just, alternated selections. Mel Kiper picked for the Saints at 29, and as the Saints taken Brian Breesy out of Clemson, the defensive tackle. And that's no surprise. Both he and McShay have mocked Breesy to the Saints in their most recent mock drafts. So that shouldn't be a surprise. McShay picked for the Saints at 40. He had him taking Luke Musgrave, the tight end out of Oregon State. And then Kiper made the 3rd-round selection for the Saints, number 71, has the Saints taking A.T. Perry, the wide receiver out of Wake Forest. For me, and I'll say this again, As long as 29 is a defensive tackle, I don't care what they do at 40 and 71 or anywhere else. I'm not going to say altogether I don't care. But my point is, there are so many needs on this team. And it's the nature of missing the playoffs 2 consecutive years, coming off a losing season where you were 22nd in the NFL against the run. Your offense was abysmal for much of the season. You have needs everywhere. You're probably going to need a replacement for Andrews Pete. You certainly need help at tight end. You're going to need to draft Alvin Kamara's replacement. I love Chris Olave, but after that, what is a realistic expectation for Michael Thomas? You're not re-signing Jarvis Landry. Is Rashid Shaheed really a 17-week contributor at wide receiver? Don't know. So I'll take a receiver. You need defensive tackles. You need edge rushers. I could take a linebacker. I could take a safety. My point is, wherever they elect to go, whatever the best available is after that, I'm good. The absolute undeniable must is an interior defensive lineman, because right now you got 2 that you count on. 2 that you signed in free agency, and that's really it. So you've got, you cannot go into this NFL season without adding interior defensive linemen, plural, to this roster. So do it at 29 and get the best one available. Maybe that's Brian Bresee. So I mentioned, sort of that's starting to crystallize. If you look at mock draft roundups, this is a mock draft roundup that I just Googled it, and this one popped up over at Canal Street Chronicles. Ryan Wilson of CBS Sports had the Saints taking Keon White, a defensive lineman out of Georgia Tech. Will Brinson of CBS has the Saints taking Will McDonald, the edge out of Iowa State. Again, defensive lineman. Bucky Brooks has the Saints taking Michael Mayer. Mike Tannenbaum has the Saints taking Jordan Addison. But there's Brad Spielberger from Pro Football Focus. Miles Murphy, edge out of Clemson, defensive line, of course. Mel Kiper, Todd McShay, each have the Saints taking Brian Bresee. It's a consensus. I mean, everybody is mocking a defensive lineman to the Saints at 29, and quite honestly, I can't imagine them doing anything other than picking an interior defensive player at 29 and then letting the draft figure out the rest of the way it is. Talked about it last week. Did the Saints draft need or value? And the answer is value, unless there is a massive glaring, flashing light need, like whenever they drafted Eric McCoy. Max Unger suddenly retired. They had to get a center. They drafted Eric McCoy. I mean, you have a giant red flashing light need at defensive tackle. That's what they got to do at 29. We'll find out for sure a week from Thursday. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.